Hi everyone, and a warm welcome back to this review series. This time we have Season 25, which I'm going in blind for. Yes, Season 24 was when I originally quit watching the show, so bar a handful of episodes, everything from this point on is a complete mystery to me. Sure, my expectations are pretty low, but I'm at least going to enjoy the process of watching every Simpsons episode at least once. That was kind of the point to this series after all. If you guys are noticing my increased output on these videos, then I would appreciate a subscribe and a like. It helps keep my spirits up knowing that you guys are enjoying the content. Anyway, a big thanks as ever to the Simpsons wiki, and let's not waste any more time, let's have a look together at Season 25. Season 25, Episode 1, Homerland. Homer is acting oddly polite after a nuclear power convention, so Lisa hires an FBI agent to investigate why. My trivia here is that this episode is based on the political thriller television series Homeland, and my best moment was Bart telling Lisa that she is incapable of experiencing joy. The season opener gets a unfortunate 1 out of 5. I have never seen the series Homeland, so I'm sure that didn't help my understanding of this story, but to be honest, that should not matter. I should still be able to get into the parody without having to see the source material. That is kind of the whole point. Sadly, I could not get into this at all. This type of premise just didn't fit well with the show. It was hard to follow, and the whole hippie explanation didn't make a great deal of sense. I just didn't buy that they would be able to win Homer over, even after they resorted to torturing him. Because of this, what should have been a big finale never really amounted to anything. In terms of the jokes, they were not good. Bart's line to Lisa about her being unable to get joy out of any situation I found funny because it is kind of true. Other than that though, none were funny. There was even a rehash of the isosceles triangle joke. I thought that maybe it was just referencing the episode Springfield, and maybe it was, but it came off like they were just telling the joke sincerely, and hoping that we would not notice that they used it before. If nothing else, I at least have to give Dan Castellaneta some credit here. He did a good job of making Homer sound vacant and creepy. Season 25, Episode 2, Treehouse of Horror 24. The 3 short stories this year are Oh the Places You'll Do, Dead on Shoulders, and Freaks No Geeks. So this is the first Treehouse of Horror since Treehouse of Horror X to have a couch gag, and my best moment was the style of the first part. This year's Treehouse of Horror is a 3 out of 5. The first part here was easily the best for me. Sure, it was a fairly by the numbers Dr. Seuss parody, but it was all very well done. The animation was well polished, and they clearly put a lot of thought into rhyming out the whole segment. Homer as the villain, the cat in a hat, also worked very well. I liked how his evilness grew as time went on, and his jab at Mike Myers was quite funny. The second segment was just a typical Bart and Lisa story really, just with people's heads being cut off. It is understandable that Bart would get fed up of being at Lisa's mercy, but the idea of Bart being in control while she slept was a clever one. I just wish the implementation of that idea was better. Him trying to kill Lisa was very rushed, and ended this part in a disappointing way. Freaks No Geeks was interesting at first, given that we got to meet all of the freaks and their different talents. There were a few good background gags about the circus too, to keep you on your toes. Once it turned into being about Homer's plan to kill Moe though, it did not work as well for me. That plan was so stupid that it was hard to get invested in, and Marge seemed to be going with the flow rather than taking an actual stand. This is definitely an average Treehouse of Horror overall, with the first part being a standout. Season 25, Episode 3, 4 Regrettings and a Funeral. At the funeral of a beloved Springfielder, 4 residents remember events in their lives they wish they could do over. So some unfortunate real life information about this one is that in the intro, Bart is sad as he writes, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K," on a chalkboard. This is a tribute to her voice actress, Marsha Wallace, who passed away 9 days before this episode premiered. And if I could give my own tribute here, indeed may she rest in peace. She was a great actress who really brought the character of Mrs. Krabappel to life. As far as the best bit in this episode goes, I like the joke at the end about how little Lisa was in the episode. This one got a 2 out of 5. They tried to do something different here, very much in the 22 short films type of mold. However, unlike in that episode, the stories here were not funny enough to hold my interest. The Mr. Burns story felt pointless, although I did like the homeless guy saying, "I ain't eating that," about the soup after Mr. Burns kissed it. Homer's story about selling his Apple stock amounted to nothing other than mentioning Apple's stock price over and over again. We didn't really need to see that, did we? The Marge regret story, same thing. There was no meat on that bone, and it was resolved when Bart was saved from his unwanted balloon ride. The Kent story probably had the most there from a character perspective. It was interesting to see how he turned down big opportunities because he is so addicted to soft news. However, the Rachel Maddow stuff just seems silly to me. She says in this episode that local news is a joke, but in reality cable news shows like the one she works for are just as big of a joke. If anything, they're even more of a joke, because they often misinform or lie by omission about very serious topics. I mean, mainstream media is anathema to most people nowadays, and in my opinion, rightfully so. Anyway, rant over. This episode didn't gel for me really, although as I say, I did like the reference about how Lisa never got her own story here. Everyone literally just ignored her. Season 25, Episode 4, Yolo. Homer's old Spanish pen pal, Eduardo Barcelona, comes to Springfield to help him fulfill all his old dreams. Meanwhile, Lisa finds a solution to the cheating problem at Springfield Elementary. So my trivia about this one is that the tallest building in Springfield shown here is an obvious parody of the Burj Khalifa, which is the world's tallest building. And my best moment was Homer imagining a melancholy. This one is a 3 out of 5. This was an average episode overall, and it did have enough decent moments to get by. Homer embracing the whole YOLO concept though doesn't make much sense if you think about it. I mean, hasn't his entire life basically been YOLO anyway? It certainly feels that way. His Spanish friend was also not the best character. His whole design just seemed a little off to me. On the plus side though, he did stop Marge from nagging Homer all the time, so that is something to be thankful to him for. Homer doing all these activities was also somewhat enjoyable, so the plot gets a pass from me overall. The Lisa subplot was also decent. I like how Bart outsmarts her regarding the cheating system, and how she has a hard time accepting that fact. I was glad things went in that direction, instead of another story about the school's test results. There were a few good jokes here which confirm this as a solid 3. As I mentioned, Homer's idea of what a melancholy would look like, I found funny. A dog made of melons. Genius. I also liked the bit at the start with Milhouse and Kirk. Kirk going through a midlife crisis is honestly something I could get behind having a whole episode centered around. Season 25, Episode 5, Labor Pains. A pregnant woman named Gretchen is trapped inside an elevator with Homer. With his help, she gives birth to a baby boy and names him Homer Jr. Homer soon develops a bond with him. So my trivia here is that while Homer is watching the baby, he is playing The Simpsons Tapped Out. And the best thing about the episode was just Homer spending time with Homer Jr. For me, this episode got a 3 out of 5. This was a fairly simple story, but one which was done quite well. It was good to see Homer's more caring side on show, and how he does form a genuine bond with this baby. Of course, he does end up getting a bit carried away with it, and starts neglecting his actual kids as a result. That dynamic was not tackled as thoroughly as I would have liked, because it was all wrapped up a bit quick. Also, the return of this woman's boyfriend was very predictable, but it was kind of the only way to go if they wanted an excuse for Homer to stop visiting there. The last little scene of showing what Homer taught the baby though was a sweet moment. Lisa also had a side plot about cheerleading here, which I'm going to leave alone. It lacks substance and is not worth talking much about really. The jokes here were average, which is good by HD standards. I liked the poker stuff at the start, and all the references about Carl's apartment throughout the episode. And the guy in the lift who did nothing to help, who also turned out to be a doctor, that was also decent. A solid episode which could have been really good if they got rid of the subplot and devoted that time into Homer making up with his kids. Season 25, Episode 6, The Kid is Alright. A new student named Isabel Gutierrez comes to Springfield Elementary, who is Lisa's intellectual equal. The two become friends, but things unravel when Lisa finds out that Isabel is a Republican. So the title of this is a parody of the 2010 comedy drama film, The Kids Are Alright. And my best moment was Mr. Burns dropping the balloons and hurting himself. This one got a 2 out of 5. This episode was just rather boring, which I know is kind of to be expected of a political satire, but this show has done this type of thing many times before and made it funny. I think the main problem here is that everything felt over-explained, and as a result came off as unnatural. I found the way that Lisa and Isabel interacted in general to be forced. They didn't seem like kids making a connection here, who just happened to have an interest in politics. Instead, they seemed like cardboard cutouts of whatever basic talking points the Democrats and Republicans make. As you guys know, I have no skin in that game at all when it comes to political parties, So hearing the same cliches we hear all the time trotted out in a Simpsons episode is about the last thing I would ever find entertaining. As far as good moments here, I guess Maggie serving in this imaginary bar was kind of cute, and as I said, I did enjoy the gag of Mr. Burns being hospitalized from balloons falling on him after he dropped them in celebration. I did not care for the Mr. Bergstrom moment though. That was a total throwaway cameo appearance that did not fit at all. Season 25, Episode 7, Yellow Subterfuge. To get back at Skinner for not letting him ride in a submarine, Bart gets Homer and Agnes to help him out in a revenge prank. So my trivia here is that when this episode first aired in the UK, the Itchem and Scratchem Below show was edited out. And that's a shame because my best moment was that Jamaican version of Itchy and Scratchy. This episode gets a 2 out of 5. This started well with the Skinner song and looked to have a clear story set up. I was actually enjoying Bart trying to be good, and Skinner was getting a bit smug with the power he had given himself. So I was not against the idea of him being taken down a peg or two. However, when the revenge angle kicked in, it never really worked for me. Making him think he killed his mum is probably a bit far, and the ending to it is not treated as seriously as it probably should be. Things go back to normal, only with Agnes promising to be even meaner to Skinner for some reason. The Krusty subplot was very random and did not really work, although it did give us a Jamaican Itchy and Scratchy, which was the only gag in the episode I liked. It is a shame to give this a 2, as it was on course for something better, but it is what it is. Season 25, Episode 8, White Christmas Blues. Due to power plant emissions, snow falls in Springfield. This makes the place a tourist hotspot, as it is the only town in America with snow for Christmas. Marge takes this chance to open up the house to boarders. My trivia here is that the license plate on Marge's car reads SAB-F01, which is the production code for this episode, and my best moment was Homer telling Flanders to shut up, as he was about to reveal the true meaning of Christmas. This Christmas-themed episode gets a 1 out of 5, probably the worst Christmas episode so far. Actually, maybe Kill Gil was worse, I don't know, there's not much in it. Either way, this episode was a total bore. It seemed like they felt no need to even bother attempting jokes. The only good moment in the episode was Homer's snappy "shut up" to Flanders. That caught me off guard in a good way. The actual storyline here was not only pointless because who cares about Bart and Lisa bickering over presents, or Marge getting into passive-aggressive arguments with strangers, it also made no sense. I mean, how on earth did the Simpsons have enough room in their house to become a proper bed and breakfast? A few of the lines also felt off, which resulted in most of the characters, especially Lisa, coming across as unlikable. This is another occasion in these HD seasons when I'm just left wondering why the writers actually expected us to care about what was going on. Season 25, Episode 9, Steal This Episode. After getting kicked out of the theatre, Homer learns how to pirate movies. However, Marge accidentally turns him in and he gets hunted down by the FBI. So my trivia here is that as a running gag in the episode, whenever advice on how to conduct internet piracy is made, the scene cuts to footage from a 2011 NASCAR race that was broadcast on Fox. And my best moment here was the court scene. This episode gets a 4 out of 5. This episode seemed to have a lot more energy about it than any other this season. Almost like the people behind it actually cared about the copyright issue and enjoyed making it. Sure, Homer hating the movie theatre and deciding to start downloading films illegally was not the most interesting thing on paper, but they did the right thing by blowing it completely out of proportion and having the FBI and Hollywood treating it like the worst crime ever. Now, the satire is fairly simple here, so I'm not going to call it amazing by any means, but it did play around a bit with how serious this crime actually is, or whether it should even be a crime at all. I did also like the twist in court where Homer's story is actually considered a movie by all the Hollywood people. The contradiction of what they make movies about and what they are actually about in real life was very well shown. The ending where Homer essentially sells out by refusing to let his friends pirate his movie is also kind of fitting. It brings the whole cycle of greed around full circle. The jokes were pretty solid without being fully laugh out loud worthy. I liked Marge saying "bye bye Maggie" and Homer saying "bye bye money" as they left Maggie with the babysitter. I also liked Bart's observation that this is the least bad type of pirate that Homer has been. It was also just nice to see Radioactive Man back in the show again after a long absence. All in all, a very enjoyable episode that was knocking on the door of a 5. A bit funnier and it would have got there. Season 25, Episode 10, Married to the Blob. Comic book guy meets a Japanese manga writer named Kumiko. They form a quick bond and soon decide to get married. So my trivia here is that this episode actually shares its title with a segment in Treehouse of Horror 17, and my best moment was the manga style montage with comic book guy and Kumiko. This episode gets another 4 out of 5. Now I was aware of the fact that comic book guy ended up getting married, but up until now I had never seen the episode where it happened. I'm glad I finally did because it was not only a worthwhile episode in terms of the characters, it also had enough good moments to be entertaining. It was not perfect, don't get me wrong, it was a fairly standard love story, and Kumiko was not developed in this episode as much as I would have liked. Hopefully they can do a little more with her in the future. They actually have that opportunity now, given that they did keep them together in the end. I was glad about that decision. At this point in the show's run, it is time to make some changes, and this one was done well enough for me to get behind. I'm actually interested now in seeing how they handle comic book guy going forward, and if a new episode can get me interested about future ones, then that is a win in my book. Some of the good moments here which I mentioned was the manga and anime style scenes of the two spending time together, as well as numerous good references to older episodes, like the time Milhouse played Fallout Boy, or Homer's resemblance to Mr. Sparkle being brought up again. Stan Lee even made another appearance here, which I was glad to see given that I enjoyed his first. It was also a nice surprise to see Milo again, even if he wasn't played by Jack Black this time. There really was a lot of callbacks to old episodes, and they were all implemented quite naturally, so it definitely rewarded hardcore fans of the show. This is very much like the last episode, a very enjoyable one which, if a bit funnier, might have been a 5. Season 25, Episode 11, Specs and the City. Mr. Burns gives all of the employees augmented reality glasses to spy on them. After Homer finds this out, he uses them to spy on Marge, and discovers that she is seeing a marriage counselor in secret. So the title here is an obvious parody of Sex and the City, and my best moment was Homer eating the Krusty Burger despite knowing the ingredients. This one is a 2 out of 5. This threatened to get interesting at several points, but ended up squandering that potential every time. The first and second half here felt like totally different episodes. The first half was obviously a take on the Google Glass product, which clearly didn't age well, given that, well, that particular product was a bit of a flop. However, some of the satire about technology being used to spy on people, and people becoming overly reliant on said technology, is still relevant regardless. However, just as they were starting to get into the juicy stuff of that, it was never expanded upon, and instead our focus was shifted onto Marge getting therapy. That side of things never seemed to have any real conflict. I mean, it seemed like it could lead to some marriage problems again, but it never really did, because Homer never actually came clean about spying on her. Also, the revelation that Marge needs therapy to tolerate Homer is not exactly a positive message to end on. The jokes were hit and miss. I personally didn't like the fourth wall breaking one about the intro sequence. It was a bit too on the nose for my taste. Nor any of the ones involving Bart's pointless subplot with Nelson. However, Homer being unable to resist the Krusty Burger for more than a few seconds got a smile out of me. Ultimately, I think the bad here slightly outweighs the good, and as such, this is getting a 2. Season 25, Episode 12, Diggs. Bart makes friends with a boy named Diggs, who gets him into Falcons. However, when Diggs jumps off a tree, Bart soon discovers that he is dealing with mental issues. So my trivia here is about the couch gag, and it is animated in the style of the 2003 comedy film The Triplets of Belleville. And you can see what the animation looked like with the picture on the right there. It was quite well done, I have to say. And my best moment was Dr. Hibbert telling Homer to pay up. This one got a 2 out of 5. I do have a lot to say about this episode, but in terms of the rating it gets a 2 because the rating is mostly judged on how much I enjoyed an episode, and I just didn't enjoy watching this one that much. The first third of this episode was mostly annoying, with silly things like Bart borrowing money from Homer just to donate it to church. That felt pointless and unconvincing. Then Homer literally harasses Bart over the money, which went on for far too long. At least the payoff to that was the only good joke in the episode, that being Dr. Hibbert giving Homer a taste of his own medicine with the whole "where's my money?". It took a while to actually meet Diggs, and once we did, I never really got what they were going for. Bart seems to really like him, and even looks up to him, which strikes me as a bit odd, given that they don't really have any chemistry together. I guess I can just about buy that Bart is into the whole Falcon side of things, but even that is never really developed fully. Just as I was trying to figure this all out, things then take another big turn as Diggs jumps off a tree. This leads to the revelation that he suffers from schizophrenia, which was about the last place I was expecting this story to go, I must say. On one hand, I kind of respect it, as it is something different to tackle mental illness on the show, and they do treat it seriously and with respect. At the same time though, they never seem to know how to make a point about it. I mean, they put all of the effort into showing how the characters reacted to this. Bart has some good, frank conversations with Lisa about it, but the ending seems to do away with all of this by going for something completely unrelated. I mean, if you can tell me how releasing all of the birds relates to the rest of Act 3, then fair play to you. Maybe they were making some vague analogy about releasing the birds from the cages to fly free or something. I don't know. Either way, I can't help but feel disappointed with it, especially given how they sacrifice any sense of fun in the plot to try and tell this serious story. This is a bit of a hard episode to fathom. There were decent ideas, and I do think that Daniel Radcliffe did a solid job with the character he was given. It was also a fairly unique episode, so it probably is worth a watch just the once. There were too many flaws though for this to be a good or enjoyable episode for me. Season 25, Episode 13, The Man Who Grew Too Much. Lisa is surprised to discover that Sideshow Bob is now the chief scientist at a chemical engineering company. The two soon bond over their appreciation of high culture, that is until Bob goes too far. So some information about this one, relating to the sad passing of Marsha Wallace, is that this episode officially marks the death of Edna Krabappel on the show, as at the end, Ned is seen with a black armband next to pictures of his dead wives. In terms of the best thing about the episode for me, it was Marge telling Homer to shut his eyes because they were too bright. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This was of a similar quality to the last episode, but unlike that one, I don't have much to say about it. Sideshow Bob coming into this story felt a bit random, and he didn't seem to inject as much energy here as he normally does. Maybe pairing him with Lisa was the reason why. I was also not really into the genetically modified food stuff, as that is not an issue in real life that I am knowledgeable about or even interested in. Maybe I should be, but I've just never cared enough to research it for myself. Act 3 with Bob's DNA altering, giving him superpowers, was a bit silly, and his final showdown with Bart and Lisa was rather anticlimactic, even if they tried to do the whole callback thing with the Springfield Dam. As far as the other moments here, separate from the story, I liked how Marge pointed out that Homer's eyes glowed in the dark. That is so true, and it happens with most characters, but it's never been brought up before in a show, so I was glad to see it finally mentioned. Jasper crossing the street, much to Marge's annoyance, was also decent. For every okay moment like that though, you had bad ones like the Rod and Todd joke, or some overly drawn out sequences. Another below par episode, sadly. Season 25, Episode 14, The Winter of His Content. When the retirement home closes, Marge invites Grandpa and 2 other octogenarians to stay with them. However, their influence soon rubs off on Homer. My trivia here is that the Itchy and Scratchy episode, Downtown Tabby, is a parody of the show Downton Abbey. And my best moment was seeing Nelson's old bully sidekicks again. This one is a 2 out of 5. This felt like a rehash of a few different episodes, and all of them were done better before. Bart embracing the bullies has already been explored on the show, and this episode did not present a reason to bother doing it again. There were also some Nelson scenes which seemed to be designed to elicit some sympathy for him, but this angle never went anywhere, and Nelson just kind of ejected from the episode. Marge losing love for Homer after he started acting old, that was important for all of 2 scenes, then was dropped. The structure of the episode was also weird, in that there was no real conclusion to either plot. They both ended together randomly on the beach, in a way which was meant to connect them, but actually didn't do that at all. At the minute, it's like they can't even do the basics, and follow one scene with another, which connects to it and expands on it. Instead, half of the scenes and the dialogue in them seem like complete non sequiturs to what came before. Jokes were decent by this season's standards though. I liked Moe's date doing parkour to get away from him, and as I said, the appearance from Nelson's old bully friends was a nice nod back to the good old early days of the show. Season 25, Episode 15, The War of Art. After Lisa's new pet guinea pig destroys the living room picture, Homer buys a new painting at the Van Houten's yard sale for $20, but they soon find out that it could be worth $100,000. My trivia here is that the episode's title is a reference to The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And my best moment was the ending. This one gets a 4 out of 5. This was definitely a 3.5 kind of episode, but as ever, I had to either round it up or down, so in this case I decided to be kind and round it up to a 4. The main reason why is that I was just glad to see a solid story, which saw things through in a logical way, and had the characters behaving the way they should. It was a nice idea to have the Simpsons buy something from their friends, which they didn't know was valuable. It is the kind of thing which can happen in people's life, so I suppose for some people it could be a bit relatable, even if this is quite an extreme example of it. It is also very realistic for two sides to form in a debate about the morals of selling it. The ending was simple, but I liked the simplicity of it. The art forger that Lisa and Homer meet managed to pose some interesting questions about the true meaning of art that managed to get Lisa thinking, and even helped Homer out by replacing the paintings. Seeing everyone make up was also a positive thing to end on. Now, this was not amazingly funny, which is why I did have to debate giving this a 4. I think a few gags at the start were dragged out for too long, like Lisa deciding which guinea pig to buy, and Homer's whoa 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 whoa, but there were a few good ones to make up for that. Homer's "that's why she'll believe it" response to Lisa regarding Marge and her opinion on his terrible parenting was one. Kirk Van Houten's awkward reactions at the auction were another. This was just a good respite after my criticisms of the previous few episodes. Season 25, Episode 16, You Don't Have to Like a Referee. Pressed for a topic at a school speech contest, Lisa gives a speech where she praises Homer's integrity as a soccer referee. After the speech goes viral, Homer is recruited to referee the World Cup in Brazil. So my trivia here is that when Martin finished his presentation about his hero, Skinner says Martin has left the building. This parodies what announcers used to say at the end of Elvis concerts. And my best moment was the parody of Neymar. This episode gets a 3 out of 5. I think the best way to describe this is that it was serviceable. Sure, it did piggyback off old plot lines, but at least they referenced that up front here, and actually tried to build off it. Of all the things that Lisa could bring up about Homer though, it was a little weird that she went with his time as a referee, but hey, the transition into the 2014 World Cup was a good one. I remember watching that tournament at the time, so this brought back some memories of that. Even though Germany beat Brazil in this episode, it was nowhere near as bad as how they actually beat them in real life, so the match fixers should be grateful really. I also liked some of the jabs at the corruption at the top of football, and as I said, the Neymar stuff was nice. If you're not a fan of the sport, then you might not get these references and things might become a bit boring for you. But take it from me, the version of Neymar depicted in this episode is not even that far off from real life. He really does dive around the pitch like this. The actual character stuff here was not that good. A few okay scenes with Homer and Lisa, but their relationship was not exactly tested or explored in any new way. The ending at least made use of Marge's learning the language subplot. The jokes were decent, along with the football related ones. I also liked Marge saying how surprised she was that Lisa never considered her to be a hero. She had every right to feel a bit snubbed by that, to be honest. Season 25, Episode 17, Lucas. Or I suppose it might as well be Lucash with that $sign at the end, am I right? Lisa dates a boy named Lucas Brontner, who wants to be a competitive eater. Marge becomes concerned that Lisa is trying to marry someone just like Homer. Also, Bart lets Snake hide out in his treehouse. So my trivia here is that this is one of 2 episodes in the series to have a $sign in the title. The other, of course, is a Season 5 episode, Springfield. And no, I'm not going to go through that whole title. My best moment here was Homer telling Marge that he is going to sleep on Ned's couch. This one got a 2 out of 5. This had a bit of potential, but it didn't deliver on it at all. Lisa and this Lucas character could have had some interesting moments together, but it felt like that was abandoned in favour of making it about Homer and Marge's problems again. I guess it is understandable that Marge will get concerned about Lisa's father figure, potentially impacting her partners in the future. However, instead of using this in a positive way to try and inspire Homer to improve his relationship with Lisa, she said it in a way which upset him. This led to the whole dinner date scene where they make up in an unconvincing way. All the while, Lisa is just sitting there like an outsider to the whole thing. Also, the gag where Homer treated it like he was asking a woman out was just dumb. The Bart side plot could have been decent. He could have hung out with Snake a bit, and maybe could have had some kind of meaningful, moral realization about stealing. Instead though, they hardly interacted until the electric chair stuff at the end, and the side plot quickly turned into Bart being a reluctant recipient of Snake's stolen gifts. This would have had more impact had there actually been some build up to it. At least the comedy was decent by this season's standards. I like how Homer loudly proclaimed to Marge that he was just at will going to sleep on Flanders' couch because their one was crap. Their argument about competitive eating was also decent. These few bits are not enough to make this episode a good one though. Season 25, Episode 18, Days of Future Future. We fast forward to the future, a time where Homer gets a new clone every time he dies. Lisa is married to a zombie version of Milhouse, and Bart has custody issues with his ex-wife Gender. My trivia here is that Gender's new boyfriend Jerry is shown to be an alien from the Alien film series, and my best moment was Bart and Miss Hoover. This episode got a 2 out of 5. This is one of the weirder episodes to date. It just always seemed to be a bit muddled about what it was trying to be. At times it tried to be a total farce, which subverted all of our expectations. At times this worked. I mean, I did like the scene of Bart and Miss Hoover in bed together, just because it was a surprising moment and had a good joke too. It was also quite fitting, how Lisa preferred a zombie version of Milhouse to the real one. And if they gave into the fact that this was a non-canon farce of an episode, then it probably would have worked better. They could have put Homer's clones to much more comedic effect, for example. However, some parts here are treated seriously, and the dynamic between the family falls into the same template as previous future stories. Because of this, it kind of loses that experimental feeling for me. I also can't buy into the serious conversations between the characters when the stuff going on around them is so goofy. So it was rather an odd mix. This was not a particularly funny episode either, despite them trying to get a few jokes in there. Overall, I guess I appreciate the effort, but the negatives here outweigh the pros. Season 25, Episode 19. What to expect when Bart's expecting. After Bart makes a voodoo doll of his art teacher, she becomes pregnant. Soon, word gets around and couples want his help. This also applies to Fat Tony, who kidnaps Bart to conceive a thoroughbred racehorse. So the title of this episode is a play on a 1984 book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. And my best moment was Homer and Bart's song. This one is yet another 2 out of 5. I'm getting sick of saying that this season. The first half of this was kind of weird, with Bart doing voodoo hexes and curses on people. It was apparently working too, which was interesting. There was also some more Shauna Bart stuff going on, which you know I'm not a fan of. And they even revealed that Shauna is apparently the daughter of Superintendent Chalmers. I'm not sure how necessary that reveal is, but it might end up with even more Shauna screen time at some point, so as of right now I'm not a fan. The second half suddenly switched into the Mafia kidnapping Homer and Bart in order to get a horse pregnant. That not only messed with the flow of the episode, it also made very little sense. The only okay thing to come out of it was Homer and Bart's song about the situation they were in, but the actual stuff with the horses felt like it dragged a bit. However, Louie warning Fat Tony not to overpromise about Homer seeing his last sunset was a nice line. It might be overcast after all. Even though I was not a fan of this episode, apparently a lot of people dislike it even more than me, as I have seen it show up on a few worst episode lists. I don't quite get that personally, as this doesn't stand out to me as anything more than an average bad episode from this era. Season 25, Episode 20, Brick Like Me. To his shock, Homer finds himself in a world where everything in Springfield is made of Lego bricks. My trivia about this one is that certain parts of the plotline here are similar to the Lego Movie, which was released just 3 months prior to this episode, and my favourite moment was the ending and the message that it had. I am happy to say that I gave this a 5 out of 5. This episode breaks into that elusive 5 territory, because it did a lot of things right in a lot of very different areas. Let's start with the obvious, the gorgeous animation. It was just always giving us a new look, and it blended the Lego style very well with the normal style of the show. Also, the effort they put into weaving the story in with this style ensured that the novelty of them trying something different like this never wore off. As far as this story goes, it was quite charming, as is often the case with Homer and Lisa stuff. It was nice to see them bond over the brick building game, but the conflict of Lisa having to choose between spending time with her new friends or her dad is a very realistic one. Homer creating a fantasy block world as an escape was a creative way to integrate that side of things into the story, and it reached its peak with Bart's battle with Comic Book Guy. As I mentioned, I also love the ending message here. Sure, Homer and Lisa make up, that was a nice moment, but it was to be expected. What I really enjoyed was the realizations about life and parenting that Homer comes to all by himself. He understands that he needs to allow Lisa to grow up, and he even gets a bit philosophical about the whole concept. He accepts that growing up in a world where not everything is perfect is inevitable, and he even comes to the conclusion that growing up, and even growing old, is what gives the present meaning. Whether you agree with that perspective or not, it is certainly a valid one that is worthy of thought. So yeah, let's not only manage to be an experimental episode with great animation, it also had a thoughtful plot, with some heart. If this episode had been funnier, I may even be calling it my favourite post-classic episode. It probably falls just shy of that honour though, because although there were a few okay jokes, none were truly hilarious to me. Still a thoroughly enjoyable watch though. Season 25, Episode 21, PayPal. After Homer ruins Marge's chance to make some new friends, she does not want Lisa to end up the same way, so she pays a girl to befriend her. So my information about this one is that Ratatouille is a nod to the 2007 Disney Pixar film Ratatouille, and my best moment was Homer and Marge trying to stop Lisa from finding out about the failed party. This one is a 2 out of 5. I don't have a great deal to say about this one, but it wasn't very funny and also felt like something we'd seen many times before. The first half with Homer embarrassing Marge by falling out with this English guy didn't do it for me, mostly because his character added nothing. The only point to it was to get Marge in this mindset of being lonely and ostracized, so the episode could use that as an excuse to have Marge buy Lisa a friend so she did not end up like her. Not only is that trope kind of played out in a sitcom format, Lisa making a new friend has been done better so many times that it's hard to not feel let down by this. At least Marge and Lisa do make up in the end, although it was nowhere near as emotionally impactful as the episode would have liked it to be. The only fun moment here was Homer and Marge having to throw a party for the only one of Lisa's old friends to turn up, and how they have to like scamper to desperately stop Lisa from finding out about it. Season 25, Episode 22, The Yellow Badge of Cowardge. Bart feels guilty when he wins the annual last day of school race because Nelson beat up the frontrunner Milhouse. However, he struggles to find the courage to admit what really happened. So my trivia here is that the episode title is a reference to the novel The Red Badge of Courage. And the best bits of the episode for me were the scenes with Bart and Maggie. So the season finale gets a 3 out of 5. So right off the bat, I am not sure why we had Lisa narrating this episode. It felt out of place and added nothing. Regardless of that though, I liked the basic story here. The school race and the bullies taking odds on it was quite fun. I am not sure why they actually needed Nelson to take Milhouse out though. It's not like they were actually going to pay Martin the 20 grand if Milhouse won. Bart having a hard time living with himself after abandoning Milhouse and winning the race was fine, I suppose. I do think that maybe they dragged it out a bit too long. But hey, the ending where he lets him have his moment was nice. Homer's fireworks subplot was kind of bland, but it did at least link up to the main plot without taking up too much time. The jokes were a bit hit and miss. I did not care for the one about Cletus' kids being deformed, nor Milhouse drinking toilet water. However, Abe abandoning people at every turn was decent. The best bits in the entire episode though were the moments with Bart and Maggie. Whether it is Bart excitingly waking her up, or her mocking him for being a coward, it was all very cute, and it was just nice to see Maggie not being left out of that sibling interaction. Overall, an acceptable way to finish the season. So guys, that is the season done, and welcome to the Season 25 summary. As far as the overall average score goes, it was 2.55, which is slightly better than last year, but not massively so. My bottom 5 episodes were The Man Who Grew Too Much at 5, What to Expect When Bart's Expecting at 4, PayPal at 3, Homerland at 2, and White Christmas Blues at number 1. And that's actually the best bottom 5 we've had in a few seasons at least. Not so many ones this time. My top 5 was Labour Pains making up the numbers as the only 3 out of 5, The War of Art at 4, Married to the Blob at 3, Steal This Episode at 2, and Brick Like Me was by far the standout this season. This was another season that is typical of the HD era, mostly unfunny, unforgettable episodes you won't think twice about after finishing. This season especially felt a bit safe on the whole. The plotlines were not that experimental for the most part, which left things feeling a bit stale and without purpose. And even when they tried to do something different, in the form of a parody or some social satire, that also felt like it was on the safe side, almost like the writers were not actually prepared to fully dig into the topics they brought up. Diggs is a poster child for this in my opinion, but as I said, this applies in almost every episode to one degree or another. The only exception really is Brick Like Me, as surprise surprise, that was the best episode of the season. I would recommend that you all check out that episode if you haven't, and it is a big reason why I preferred this season over season 24. Also, this season's worst episodes were not as bad as season 24's worst, or 23's worst for that matter. There were only 2 1-rated episodes after all. That is surprisingly low. The thing is, this season just had a lot of 2 out of 5s, which is why it felt so boring and forgettable. As far as the characters go, it was mostly all stuff we have seen before. I don't think we learned anything new about any of the main cast, really. Comic Book Guy did get a permanent change though, so I am interested in seeing how he is handled going forward. Will he still be mean and sarcastic, or will he mellow out a bit? We shall see. That's about all for this one, guys. I hope very much that you got something out of this, whether it was the season itself or my analysis of it. If you did, then please take the time to like and subscribe, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, take care.